No, don't sass me.
I don't get sassy.
Sass me. Sass me.
Talk about. Don't be giving me that sassiness or what you just told me I was doing. You are so wrong today. Like, you are so wrong. That's 1 out of every 1,000, and we up here hoorahing and praising the Lord. And guess what? The Nets got better.
Welcome to The Jump. I am Rachel Nichols alongside the Bash Brothers, NBA champion Richard Jefferson, NBA champion Kendrick Perkins. Guys, we brought you back today because you promised to play nice, but I don't know how that's going to work out.
Well, I just don't understand how, with all of the advances in technology, Perk can't figure out how to back up from the camera.
Maybe he doesn't want to, Richard.
No, but no one.
Maybe
what?
Maybe I'm just trying to spread some of this hair that I still have on my face and my head and put it and share it with you. Or maybe, how about this, RJ? You ever heard of the saying, when you're on time, you're probably late? You ever heard of that? You ever heard of that? How about that one?
Yes, I have, and I'll keep my rebuttal to myself. I will keep it to myself.
Richard regularly walks into the studio with about 45 seconds to spare before showtime.
But what they don't understand is that I'm here 45 minutes before, right? So it's just really for dramatic effect. That's the only reason why I do it.
Can you say on television what you're doing for those 45 minutes? Because sometimes it's getting a sandwich, and sometimes, Perk, I don't know.
It could be a salad. It could be numerous things. But we're on Disney, so we're not allowed to talk about that.
All I know is producer Danny has a rule. Don't get fired on a Friday. You've put in the entire week of work. There's no reason to miss that check. So, boys, I will just say,
Well, Perk is still here, so apparently the week is going all right.
Coming up, my friends, we will discuss how Rockets fans should feel today after dealing Victor Oladipo and James Harden in the same season. First, though, what's funny about the NBA trade deadline is that it is, at its backbone, paperwork. Building and unbuilding rosters on paper that teams can only hope will work in real life, moving numbers around on paper to make salary cap and balance sheet configurations work, all the while analyzing spreadsheets that plot out players' projected future production. And yet, for an event that is based in paperwork, sure brings out the wild side in the league's front office execs. Yesterday, we saw swashbuckling stare downs, daring leaps of faith, and in the end, a madcap sprint to the 3 p.m. deadline that brought a cascade of deals that moved 46 players between 23 of the NBA's 30 teams. In fact, there were more trades yesterday than there have been on any deadline day in the past 35 years. Which is even more incredible when you consider that the biggest news coming out of the day was a trade that didn't happen. The Raptors had planned to move their heart and soul of the franchise for reasons so practical that even Kyle Lowry himself seemed at peace with the decision when he spoke at a post-game press conference the night before. And yet, even though the Raptors did get 3 of the NBA's top teams involved in a bidding war that could have significantly changed the balance of this playoffs, none of the deals they were ultimately offered were significant enough to convince team president Masai Ujiri to pull the trigger. Here was Masai last night explaining.
In the heat of the moment, I was surprised, because to be honest, I viewed him, as somebody that can go and put a stamp on what you're trying to do this year, and the teams are selected. I know if he goes to those places, I know what that, I've lived it, I've seen it. I know what the guy does. I know who he is, I hope I'm pardoned that if I valued him too much, but hey, that's what I believe in today.
That was very warm. From a strictly cold and practical angle, though, there is an argument that even if the offers for Lowry were lower than Masai thought that they should be, they're more than nothing, and that while Kyle could re-sign with Toronto as a free agent this summer, or the Raptors could work out a sign and trade if he chooses elsewhere, there's just as good a chance that Kyle simply moves on and Toronto ends up with nothing. If that happens, he would be the 5th Raptors key player in 2 years to leave the team with no assets coming back the other way. And yet, on a day like yesterday, cold and practical just wasn't where the Raptors were interested in when it came to perhaps the most beloved player in franchise history. And so instead, Kyle stayed a Raptor. The same cannot be said for Norm Powell, who has had a career season and will likely be looking for a serious salary package this coming summer. Ujiri moved him to Portland, a team looking to insert itself into the void that the banged-up Lakers are leaving in the West. Did the Blazers do enough to be real contenders? Or did the real level up out West come from the Nuggets, who acquired Aaron Gordon and JaVale McGee? Out East, did the Bulls do enough to climb past the edges of playoff contention by picking up Nikola Vucevic? And what about the Heat? In the past few days, Miami managed to acquire Victor Oladipo, Trevor Ariza, Nemanja Bjelica, while giving up just one rotation player, no first-round picks, and still keeping cap flexibility for free agency this summer. No wonder Pat Riley looked so pleased when he met with the media last night, saying that come playoff time, quote, "I'd watch out for us." Oh, and then there's the Nets, who also managed to come out winners yesterday despite not making any trades. Thanks to the Sixers missing out on Lowry, Brooklyn remains the conference favorite. It was, all in all, a historically wild day that will have repercussions for years to come. Not bad for a bunch of paperwork. And guys, Caesars William Hill didn't update their odds until after we were off the air yesterday due to all the movement. Miami went from plus 1,400 to plus 1,200 after acquiring Oladipo. So they were the big mover. That puts them into the top four out east behind Brooklyn for the betting rights, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, and Philly. So, Perk, what do you think happens now in the East playoff race?
Well, we all know who's the three-headed monster with Milwaukee, Philly, and the Nets, right? But the sleeper is going to be the Eastern Conference champions, and that's the Miami Heat. But I'm not sold on them just yet, and here's why. They lost Jay Crowder in the offseason, and yes, I understand they got Victor Oladipo yesterday in the draft. With the trade, but I don't know which Victor we're going to get. If it's the Victor from 3 years ago or 4 years ago when he took the Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron James to 7 games, then watch out for the Heat. But if it's going to be the Victor of late, I just don't know. He hasn't been consistent. He hasn't really been healthy. He's been in and out of lineups for whether it was with the Rockets or the. It looks good on paper, but I want to see the action live and up close on the court.
No, Perk is 100% correct, and that's not something you're going to hear me say a lot over the next hour. Over the next hour, you're not going to hear me say that. But Miami has brought themselves back into the conversation because they were struggling, because they've had guys underperform and injuries and COVID, and all the things that come with that. But my biggest thing about the Miami Heat is, are you going to be able to beat two of those teams? And I just don't think that they can. If we're talking about them making a legitimate run to the finals again, then you're going to have to most likely beat the Brooklyn Nets and then the Philadelphia 76ers, or you're going to have to beat the Milwaukee Bucks and then the Brooklyn Nets. And I just don't see them beating two of those teams back to back to get to the NBA Finals.
Well, look, we didn't talk about the Milwaukee Bucks much yesterday because they didn't make a move yesterday, but we can't forget that they did acquire PJ Tucker earlier in the week. I think that did make them better. Mm-hmm. I am interested to see. Look, when we've seen the Heat and Sixers, for example, match up, Jimmy Butler has often been the wild card in that situation and made sure that his new team has beaten his old team. Not every time, but often. And, we saw what they did to Milwaukee last year, but Milwaukee is better. And then Brooklyn is a whole new thing in the mix this year. So I think it is going to be scrappy in the East. And if you look at the West, we have updated odds for them, too. The Lakers, still the heavy betting favorites. I always want to make this clear. When Vegas does odds, it's about which teams they expect the most money coming in on. That's how the odds are calculated.
How much money they can take from everyone else.
Exactly. Clippers are second, Jazz third, and the Nuggets jumped into the top four after their big trade. So, Richard, what do you think happens now in the West playoff race?
Whoo! I don't know to tell you.
What was that noise?
The woo was like, okay, look, the Denver Nuggets got better. They added pieces that they lost in the offseason as far as like athletic players. So you lose Jeremy Grant, you gain Aaron Gordon, who I believe is better than Jeremy Grant. You lose Plumlee, and then you gain JaVale McGee. So they kind of saw that what they lost, they needed back. Right. So, okay, Utah's been the best team all year long. I think the Clippers, they probably got the one player that they needed. They got the point guard that they needed, and Rondo he's that guy. So I just don't really think that anything changes. If the Lakers are 100% healthy, which is an if, the Lakers are the best team, and there's no one's going to beat them. So I think this in the West.
Yeah.
So I think this arms race is really for, can we get there? And if the Lakers aren't 100%, can we overtake them? And I think there's a few teams that can.
Well, I have to disagree with you. Even if this Lakers team as constructed, if they're 100% healthy, they're not the best team in the Eastern Conference. I mean, in the Western Conference, RJ. When I'm looking at this team right now, without Anthony Davis and LeBron James, have you been watching them lately? Like last night, listen. Literally, they were shooting shots and they were hitting so hard off the glass. I started ducking. I started ducking from inside the living room of the hotel.
What
like
would
they have to repaint the rim.
Listen, Perk,
listen,
no,
what
stop.
I'm saying is,
Perk, stop. What would the Utah Jazz look like if you took away Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell? What would the Suns look like if you took off Chris Paul and Devin Booker? What would the Clippers look like if you didn't have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George? They would look like the Lakers are looking right now.
No, they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't. No, they would not. And here's what I'm saying. Everybody else is getting better. You got the Portland Trail Blazers, in my opinion, who got better yesterday. After watching them against the Miami Heat without even the addition of Norman Powell, looking at C.J. McCollum, how he's tearing it up, coming back off an injury, dropped 30 in the first half. We know what Dame Dollar is capable of. But then they add Norman Powell to the mix, a guy who's averaging 20 points a night on high field goal percent shooting, a big guard with tenacity, and he's a champion. He's coming in with that championship pedigree, and he's battle tested. What I'm saying right now is that the others for the Lakers don't look that convincing to me no more. Like Caldwell Pope is not playing well. Marcus Gasol is not playing well. We had, Taylor Horton Tucker. He's shown us flashes in a small sample size, but he hasn't been playing well. And you can't sit up here and tell me that the Lakers are a top 5 team right now in the Western Conference.
I said if the Lakers are 100% healthy. Now, when you're talking about 100% healthy, you're talking about Anthony Davis before his injury was probably one of the leading guys, Rudy Gobert, but top 5 in Defensive Player of the Year. LeBron James was leading the race for MVP. You lose one of they had the number 1 rated defense. They had come on, Perk. I'm not saying that the guys have played well in their absence. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is